a farmer spotted a brown tarp tied up with blue rope. When he went closer, he found a man's body, but his face had been disfigured by acid. Police came and none of it seemed to make sense until they started to check the local CCTV footage. Craig Rideout grew up in a really close-knit family, and it really seems that family was his priority. He was incredibly close with his sister Robin, and when she had children of her own, he was the fun uncle. Robin's children loved Uncle Craig. And then it wasn't long before Craig decided he wanted to start a family of his own. He'd seen how much joy his sister was getting from having a family, and he knew that was what he wanted with his life too. By 1993, Craig had met and married a woman called Laura, and together they'd had one son, Colin. Now, not long after the birth of Colin, they had another son, Alexander, and then after that, they continued to have 5 more children. So this is now a family of 9 altogether, 7 children and 2 parents. And I know my family is a family of 6, there's 4 of us kids. That is a lot of people under one roof. And there were a lot of joyful, wonderful times within that. But one of the things that the family also saw that they were facing was significant financial difficulties, which isn't surprising. There are 2 incomes coming into this household and 5 children to support and 2 adults. So it makes sense that things would feel a little bit difficult financially. Craig was working as an IT specialist, and during this time, as his children were growing up, he would pick up more and more hours at work. And he was doing this because he really felt like he had to. He didn't really have another choice. The family had decided to grow. They decided to have 7 children. And so Craig would find himself away from home a lot, working more and more hours, working in different places. And so at the weekends, he'd come home, he'd hang out with his kids. But this caused a real fracture in the family. Even though Craig was out earning money for the family, it wasn't necessarily viewed in that way by Laura, his wife, or some of the kids as well, especially the older kids. They were kind of with their mother a lot. They were getting to see how this was making her feel. They were getting to see how this was making them feel. And there started to be a bit of resentment building up with Laura, and especially the older 2 kids, Colin and Alexander. And then in 2014, Craig was totally blindsided when Laura presented him with divorce papers, and it's reported that he just didn't see this coming at all. He really didn't expect that Laura wanted a divorce, and it seems like she hadn't really spoken to him about it beforehand, but her mind was made up. She wanted to take the kids and leave, and she didn't want to be in a relationship with Craig anymore. Now, it seems Craig did fight this. He didn't want a divorce. He didn't want to leave the house. He didn't want to not be a family unit. But Laura was set on it, and so the divorce proceedings went ahead. And what I will say here is that we have some information about the relationship and about the kind of parental figures within that household, and there's mixed accounts of what both Laura and Craig were like in that household. And it doesn't seem like anyone was a saint by any means, but it's really difficult to get an accurate kind of depiction of what Laura and Craig were like as parents because of a number of things that happen, which we will get to. So we know that the 2 older kids had some resentment towards their dad, Craig. And so when the family split and the divorce was happening, the 2 older kids went to live with their mum, Laura. And meanwhile, the younger children were all placed in the care of their dad, Craig. And there's a couple of reasons as to why this happened. First of all, Craig had this very stable career in IT, and he'd made it so he'd actually moved out. He'd moved to Penfield, still in New York, and this wasn't too far away from where the kids had grown up. So the kind of secondary reason, other than him having this stable job and this regular income, was that he now had this rental home where all of the kids could come and stay with him. They could still go to their same schools. They could hang out with their same friends. And again, there was just this sense of stability and security that maybe wasn't as present in Laura's life and in her kind of new life that she was setting up. And I think these were the main reasons as to why the court sided with Craig having custody over the younger children at least. Laura, by contrast, had moved in with her boyfriend, her new boyfriend, Paul Tucci. Sometimes the courts can see that as a little bit destabilizing, especially with a new partner. And so she'd done that and was also wanting to move out of state to North Carolina. She wanted to take all the kids with her. And again, this was probably seen as though it could be destabilizing. And so that's why those decisions were made in terms of custody. So this is all happening over a few months. And then we get to the summer. We're in July of 2016. It's July 20th. And on this day, one of the first things we know that happens is that Robin, who's Craig's sister, they're incredibly close, she is worried about him. She actually hasn't been able to get in contact with him over the morning and the previous evening. And so she started to worry, as you do. She started to build things up in her mind and she thinks, you know what, I'm just going to go to his house, knock on, and he'll probably be there and I can ask him what's going on and we can have a catch up. So she goes to his house, but she is absolutely floored when she gets there and she finds Laura inside. And not only that, but Laura is cleaning the house. This is odd because Laura and Craig, as we know, they didn't end amicably. Things are tense between them. And so for Laura to be cleaning his house, it just seems odd. Robin later said, quote, Laura said she was just tidying up because the kitchen smelled. I thought this was unlike Laura because she rarely cleaned when she was living with my brother. A little while later, after that, a 911 call comes in and it's from Robin. She has gotten so worried that she's called the police to request a welfare check. She says she can't get in touch with her brother Craig. He's not answering calls or texts. And she even says in the phone call, I might be making a mountain out of a molehill here, but she just wants to be safe and kind of check in. And so the police agree and head to the house. They said, we'll meet you there, Robin. And they head to the house to do a welfare check. Officers arrive at the house and immediately they can tell it just seems that no one is inside. They knock on, they wait, and there's no answer. And so Robin has met them there. She's got a key to the house. And so they are allowed entry into the house. They enter, they go searching around, they're calling out for Craig, but there's no answer. There's no sound of anyone being inside. And soon enough, they clear the house and they realize Craig isn't there. And this in itself is very odd because Craig hangs out at his house, he goes to work, and he is with his kids. They're the three things that Craig does. So for Craig to not be there, for Craig to not be in contact with anyone is quite concerning at this point. And so officers decide they're going to do a canvass of the area. They are going to go door to door to neighbours' houses and just ask around, see if anyone has heard anything or seen anything out of the ordinary. They don't get anything really of note from the neighbours. And so they decide to start looking at Craig's close circle. And of course, they need to start with Laura, his ex-wife who he's separated from. They knew Laura had been at the house earlier, and so they bring her in for a kind of informal questioning. And they ask her, what's going on? Why were you there? What have you been up to this morning? Just simple questions like that. And immediately she says, yep, I was there. I came earlier. I picked up the kids, it was kind of prearranged, picked up the kids, we went shopping, we got a little food, went to a doctor's appointment. And actually, initially when she'd arrived at the house, she'd noticed that the kitchen was a bit smelly, so she'd cleaned. But then they'd done all of these things, gone shopping, got some food, gone to this doctor's appointment, and then they'd returned back and found the police there. So that was kind of all she knew. She hadn't seen Craig this morning and she had picked the kids up and that's it. And so the next thing for the police to do, they need to try and find Craig ASAP. And so they start to track his phone movements. Now, his phone at this current time actually wasn't anywhere in the immediate vicinity. It wasn't in his house. It was tracked to Jerusalem in Yates County, which was a little further south. It was about an hour away and detectives really didn't know. There was no reason as to why Craig would be there. He didn't necessarily frequent that area for any reason particularly. And so they start thinking this is a little bit suspicious. Now, what they don't know is something has happened kind of simultaneously with this. At 7:53 a.m. that morning, a local farmer was just riding his bike through an area of Yates County, through this little part of Jerusalem. And as he's riding his bike, something out of the corner of his eye catches in the sunlight. It's like a glimmer, a sort of glint of red. And it's a dark red, and he looks and he's curious as to what it is. It certainly seems out of place. And I will say that I saw the crime scene images for this particular dark red substance. And I don't know that I would have thought it was anything out of the ordinary. It does look like blood, but I probably would have fobbed it off as being from an animal or being something easily explainable away. But this farmer doesn't think that's the case. He's in this area all the time, and it is completely out of the ordinary for him to see this. So he pulls over his bike to the side of the road, gets a little bit closer, and as he does, he sees that those blood drops lead further into the kind of forest area. And so he follows them. And as he's moving towards them, he sees right there in the very near kind of distance, he sees a brown tarp. And that tarp is tied up with blue kind of rope string. And he's looking at it and he can't quite make out what it is or what's underneath there. But you don't need to be super into true crime to know that it's probably not going to be a good thing. And so he slowly moves over. He pulls up a corner of the tarp and he sees that there is in fact a dead body. He called police and they arrived pretty quickly. And when they lifted up the tarp to kind of inspect the scene and the body and confirm that this person was dead, they realised pretty quickly he had been deceased for some time. But on top of that, they saw that his clothes and his face, any defining features, had been drenched in some kind of acid, and it had actually been so strong that it had disfigured him. There was no way to identify this person just from looking at them. And alongside this, they're kind of looking around the area of this new crime scene, and they see just off to the side, there is a shovel. And that shovel has a little sticker on it. This is incredibly important evidence and information. It has a little sticker on it, it has the barcode, and it leads them eventually to see that this particular shovel would have been purchased at a nearby Walmart store. Now I say nearby, and I don't mean nearby Jerusalem, Yates County, I mean nearby Craig's home. Now, of course, this is happening simultaneously. Craig's family don't know that this is happening. They don't know a body's been found. They know that Craig is missing, but they're not kind of sure if it's a bad missing or if he's, gone off on his own. They don't know what's happening. But this is all happening simultaneously. And then the police officers who are at the crime scene start hearing a phone ring. And they look down and they realise that it is this deceased person's phone that's ringing. So one of the officers answers it, and it's actually a colleague. It's another police officer who is at Craig's house calling Craig's phone just to see if he can get in contact with him. And so the two officers are talking to each other and they quickly realise what's happened. They quickly realise that the deceased body in front of them is most likely Craig. And they do confirm this a little while later with dental records. The autopsy would find that Craig, his cause of death was strangulation. He had a kind of rope tied around his neck until he died. The next thing for the police officers to do is try and track how Craig got from his house, where he was last known to be, all the way to this area in Yates County. And so they're kind of thinking about how they might track this, and they start to gather CCTV footage from along the route that he likely would have taken or been taken. And so they gather up all of this footage, and there is a lot. They're getting Ring doorbell footage, they're getting building CCTV, they're getting business CCTV, they're getting all of this footage. And the officers literally have to sit there and trawl through the entire night, multiple different cameras, hundreds of hours of footage. And at this point, they don't really know what they're looking for, because they know what Craig's vehicle is. It's a minivan. But beyond that, they know his license plate, but on the footage it's quite grainy, it's quite blurry. They're not going to be able to make out a specific license plate or number plate. And so they're trawling through this footage. But what the officers did know was that when they had tracked Craig's phone's movements, it had pinged leaving his house at around 3 a.m., just a little after 3 a.m. And so that is a very specific time. And not only that, but there aren't many cars out at around 3 a.m., certainly not travelling the exact route from Craig's house to where his body was eventually discovered. So they focus in on that particular part of the footage and where it would line up along the route. And they sit and they're waiting and they're watching. And eventually a vehicle that looks like a minivan, like Craig's minivan, shoots past. And just seconds later, another vehicle shoots past, and it looks like this vehicle is a sedan. Now, the issue with this is that it's obviously nighttime, it is pitch black. The footage they have, as I said, it's grainy, but it's also from quite far away. And so they're not able to make out any identifying features particularly. They just know that there is what looks like Craig's minivan and a sedan, and they're traveling very, very closely together. So they kind of track these along as far as they can track them. And we obviously had a lot of help from the mobile phone pings on the way to the body dump site. But we know that Craig's phone was found with his body. So that's kind of where that trail ends. And in terms of looking out for the cars coming back, it really is a bit of a guessing game. But it's important that they try and find that footage, because by the time those cars are traveling back, it's going to be light outside. It's going to be a lot easier to see them and to maybe have some identifying marks on the cars themselves. And they do eventually see those two vehicles moving along in bright daylight, and they confirm that it is a minivan and a sedan. Unfortunately, there isn't any more detailed information, but this is a start. And they track these two vehicles moving along that route as far as they possibly can before, unfortunately, they turn into a blind spot and the kind of camera trail goes dead. They lose them. Craig's minivan has actually been located. It's been dumped relatively nearby his house. But unfortunately, where it was dumped, there was no CCTV footage, no Ring doorbell footage. And so they didn't see who was in the car. It's kind of a dead end. During this time, police have obviously informed Craig's sister Robin about her brother's death and that it is a murder. And Robin says to them that she might have some information. She says that she knew her brother kept a camera in his house. But it's not one of those cameras that you'd get on one of the like Ring inside footage cameras where you can clearly see there's a camera watching you. It was actually a hidden camera inside what looks like an alarm clock. And he'd done this for security. He was obviously concerned for one reason or another. And so police think this is potentially a big break. If they can extract that footage, first they need to find it, but if they can find it and extract that footage from that alarm clock, they might be able to find who did this. And so they start searching around the house. They're looking in all of the areas that you might think. And as they get to the kitchen, they see this desk there and there is an alarm clock on it. And the alarm clock is pointed right to where the entrance door is. And so if anyone has entered that house, they would be caught on camera. This is a big break for police. And so they extract the footage and they sit there, they pop it on the screen and they start watching through it. And the first thing they see is one of Craig's younger children, one that's in his custody, sits down at the desk, gets out a laptop, starts working on it, doing some homework or something. And this goes on for a few minutes, continues on. And then suddenly the footage stops. And the police officers look at one another and ask, what's going on? Is there a lag? Has something happened? Do we need to fast forward? And they realise that unfortunately, this SD card, this memory card that they have this footage on, it had completely full memory. And so up to that point had recorded, but from then on, it just stopped and didn't record anything else. It wasn't one of these ones that resets itself and starts recording again. And so as promising as this lead was, they realised pretty quickly, again, it's a dead end. The police, meanwhile, are searching the entire residence. They've searched upstairs, they searched the kind of ground floor, and then they go down to the basement. And inside the basement is an awful lot of questionable items. Firstly, in the middle of the floor, they see a number of black rubbish bin bags, and they're large bags and they look like they're filled with something. So the officers put on their gloves and they start opening them up, and they see inside there are bloodied paper towels and bloodied gloves inside. They knew the murder happened here. And then they get out an ALS. Now, I did not know what this was. It is an alternative light source, and I'll just explain a little bit about how it works. So in crime scene forensics, we're probably used to seeing from CSI, from fictional dramas, and from the real life stuff, the use of luminol, a chemical that is sprayed on surfaces and kind of lights up the presence of blood. Even if it's been cleaned away, it will light it up and you know that something's happened there. There is some sort of blood. Now, an alternative light source works a little bit differently to that. There is no chemical. It is literally a light source, and it operates at different frequencies and can show different things. It can detect a number of things like body fluids and hair, even bruising underneath skin, gunshot residue, things like that. But blood doesn't glow under ALS like it would in luminol. Instead, it creates a kind of shadow. It almost absorbs the light. And so when that happens, officers will know that there is patches of potential blood, and then they can go in and swab from there and do all of their forensic testing. This is really useful because, very much unlike luminol, there's no potential harm to the evidence. There's no potential that it's going to degrade the sample or dilute it in any way. So they use this ALS and they see immediately there are patterns of blood spatter. It is very clear that not only did something bad happen here, but it was incredibly violent as well. So, while this is all going on, police, remember that shovel that police found at the crime scene? They've been working behind the scenes to try and get a bit more information about it. They sort of hit the jackpot with that label that was still attached. They found out it had been sold at this Walmart near Craig's house. And so they went into that Walmart and asked for some more information. And they realised that in the kind of lead up to the murder, only one of those shovels had been sold. And so they got the footage from that particular time, and they took the footage from outside of the store and above the kind of cash registers as well, the bird's eye view of the cash registers. So the day before Craig went missing, the footage shows that a little after midnight, a sedan pulls up outside of that Walmart store. Now, immediately, this pings for the officers because, of course, it's a sedan. They are on the lookout for that kind of car. And then out of the sedan, out of the back passenger side, a man gets out. He walks around the car, walks into the Walmart, and all this time that footage from outside is kind of grainy. It's not very clear. We can see that it is a man. He looks maybe in his early to mid-20s, maybe a little older, maybe a little younger. It's hard to tell. But he then walks into the Walmart store, and then we have footage from inside the store looking at the door, and this is a lot clearer, it's a lot crisper, and they get a incredibly precise image of who this person is. And it is in fact Craig's eldest son, Colin. And just a bit of a kind of side note about this footage. So as Colin's walking into the store, we see behind him the car that he's just got out of, the sedan. It drives past the front of the store. So we get, again, a really clear, crisp image of the car. Now, unfortunately, we don't see any license number plate. We don't see any of that. We don't see any of the faces of the people inside, but we do see that there are definitely at least 3 people in the car, 2 people in the front and 1 person in the back. So Craig didn't do this alone. Who did he do it with? I wonder. The rest of the footage is shown to police, and we see that bird's eye view of the cashier and of the shovel being bought. And it is, of course, Colin buying that shovel. And it looks exactly the same as the one found at the crime scene. This part gave me chills. We are literally watching a son buy one of the things associated so closely with the murder of his own father. And he's not just buying the shovel, he also buys 4 pairs of gloves. And those gloves look pretty identical to the ones that were later found at Craig's home in those bin bags, the bloodied gloves. And the next thing we have that happens that is of major significance is on July 21st, and police get what's reported in news archives as an anonymous call, but in a documentary I watched, it was a woman that called this in, but we don't have any identifying kind of features. But she is at this place called Devil's Bathtub. It's an area with a kind of pond body of water. And as she's there, she sees a car has driven up, 2 men have gotten out of it, and they're acting a little bit suspicious. They are by that pond and just kind of like walking around, looking around. And then they pull out of their car a number of black rubbish bin bags and throw them into the pond. And the woman's witnessing this. She's seeing this all happen, and she just gets the feeling that something is off. And so she calls the police, and very, very quickly the police turn up, and they turn up while these 2 men are in the act of disposing of these bin bags. And so they pull up, they get out of the car, and they ask them what they're doing. And as soon as they get out of the car, they realize they actually know these 2 people. It's Colin, the eldest son of Craig, and it's also Alex, the second son of Craig. The boys plead their innocence. They say they weren't doing anything. They don't even know what's in the bags. But the police officer says, look, Craig, Alex, we've got a team coming in to go and get those bags. So we are going to pull them out. We're going to see what's inside of them. So you may as well just tell us. But the boys stum. They are not saying a word. And so the teams come, they pull in those bags, they open them up, and inside they see drain cleaner. And this drain cleaner, it has very specific bottle top lids, the kind of security cap ones that you have to push down. They've got a sort of child lock on them. And what I hadn't mentioned is that earlier at the crime scene in Yates County, where Craig's body was found, there were also a number of bottle caps. And police are thinking probably this drain cleaner fluid, the missing caps, they're probably going to be a match to the ones found near Craig's body. And thankfully, they do have certain serial numbers etched onto the lids, so they're going to be able to identify that pretty quickly and easily. So the bottles of drain fluid cleaner and the caps have gone in for forensic analysis, and they managed to find that these particular bottles were sold again at a Walmart not long before Craig's death. And of course, they have CCTV to go along with that. And so police view the CCTV and they see that it is, in fact, Colin buying that drain cleaner. But he is not alone this time. And instead, he's with a unidentified woman, but also a woman they do recognise. It's his own mum, Laura. They also track at another Walmart. These people are quite obsessed with Walmart, it seems. They also find footage of Laura and her partner Paul buying brown tarp that looks very, very similar to the tarp that Craig's body was found in. And of course, forensics teams have got all of this evidence and they're analysing it. And on top of that, they are analysing more evidence that was found in the black bin bags that were in the pond that Alex and Colin had disposed of or tried to dispose of. And inside they find bloodied clothes. And those bloodied clothes are really what seems to bring Laura down, because they find her jeans and they have her DNA on it, and they also have Craig's blood on them. They also found that Coke bottle that was randomly placed in Craig's basement. That has Laura's DNA on it too. Both Colin and Alexander are arrested on suspicion of tampering with evidence, and then they are rearrested alongside Laura, their mum, and Paul, her boyfriend, with suspicion of murder. Now, normally, people accused of the same crime can be tried together at the same trial. And this is something I actually haven't seen done a lot. This does happen in this case. So all 4 of them are tried at the same murder trial. But the reason this doesn't tend to happen so much is because often there is a good legal reason not to do this. They don't want to get all the way through the trial, people to be found guilty, and then there be a retrial because of an appeal that comes out of this kind of joint trial nature. But anyway, in this case, they were all tried together. At trial, evidence was presented to show that Colin had actually emailed his father, Craig, just days before the murder. And in the emails, Colin is talking about how he's angry at his dad. He accuses him of dragging this divorce out for a long time, trying to maintain control over his mother. It also accuses him of threats and lies and abuse. And I know I mentioned at the start of this episode that there are some complexities in this case, and we obviously don't have Craig's version of what happened. And you take of it what you will. There's not a huge amount of information out there, but it doesn't look like, certainly from the boys' point of view, Craig was the best father. But also it seems like from the younger siblings' point of view, Craig was an amazing dad. So it's really hard to kind of, without evidence, we can't know for sure what happened inside that house. And Colin does go on later to admit that his father was never physically abusive, or at least never that he saw firsthand, but he acknowledges that he might have been behind the scenes and he just never actually saw it. Ultimately, though, the judge just didn't allow for that evidence to come in because it wasn't evidence, it was hearsay, it's talk. And actually, Colin does talk about how much he disliked his father, but he also talks about, he's not glowing in how he talks about his mother. He says that he felt he really had to look after her. He had to take care of her, and she wasn't, if she had an appointment or something, he was the one reminding her to go to it. It seems like he really was parenting his own mother in this case, and he talks a lot about that. At trial, the prosecution present their case along with all of the evidence, and they say they believe that the initial plan was for the four of them. So just to clarify as well, I mentioned about an unidentified woman earlier being in Walmart at the time certain things were purchased. She actually doesn't appear in the story again, and I think she was an innocent bystander, perhaps a friend. I didn't dig too much into that because it wasn't in the court documents, and therefore I don't think it's very necessary or important, but I just wanted to clarify that because I know I kind of like dumped that in and then left it. But the four people who are accused, so that is Paul, who's Laura's boyfriend, Laura, Colin and Alex, all four of them, the prosecution said that they had planned this murder. And what had happened was that they were going to use a key that one of the boys had to enter into the house and kind of surprise Craig and lure him down to the basement. And once they were there, they would kill him. They would then put his body in his own minivan, transport him to that area of Yates County and bury him. Of course, we know this partially happened, but didn't go exactly to plan. It seems that Craig fought back a lot more than they expected. And so that's why there was the huge amounts of blood that was later found under that ALS, alternative light source device. And on top of that, it seems that when they got to the place where they were planning on digging a hole to bury him in, the shovel that they bought, they'd only bought one shovel and it was a little bit flimsy, certainly wasn't appropriate to be using on that terrain, on that kind of dirt. And so they gave up and just left him there and drove home. In the end, Paul Tucci, Laura's boyfriend, was acquitted of all charges. It just seems there wasn't enough evidence to charge him, and so he is presumed innocent. On top of that, although I will say that the clothes that he was wearing in the Walmart footage, they were never found. Innocent or guilty, they were never found, which is interesting. I don't tend to lose clothes, but I don't know. Who knows? On top of that, Alex, so that's the younger of the two boys, he was found guilty on tampering with evidence charges, and he was sentenced to either 3.5 or 4 years. The amount varies, but either way, he is out now. He was released on parole, and actually his parole was up in July of this year, so he's a completely free man now. Both Laura and her own son and Craig's own son, Colin, are both found guilty of murder. It's second-degree murder, and there are a couple of other charges, but ultimately, Colin ends up getting at minimum of 27 years. He gets life with a minimum of 27 years, and Laura gets life with a minimum. Colin has later spoken about how the fact is that he no longer has contact with his mother at all. And look, I'm not excusing Colin's behaviour at all in this case. I think it's awful and incredibly tragic. But what I will say is that for a mother to use her son in this way and to include him and potentially encourage him in the killing of his own father is absolutely despicable. And I think tells us a lot about who Laura is as a person and who Laura is as a mum as well. And that is where I will leave this case. Thank you for joining me for today's episode of Red Rum. Let me know what you thought about today's case. If you are new here, it's quite a lot of new listeners on Spotify. Thank you so much for being here. I upload episodes every Monday and Thursday, so make sure you're subscribed. Monday is a video version and podcast version, and Thursday is a podcast exclusive. And at the end of the episodes, when I've been interested in something, I will leave a little recommendation, something completely unrelated to true crime, usually, just to kind of bring us out of the world of it just before you get back to your real lives for the rest of the day. And so today I am bringing a recommendation. I love to bake. I am obsessed with baking, and I've been looking at baking books. I've asked for a couple for Christmas, but I could not resist getting my hands on this book. I am ashamed to say I'd never heard of this before, because as a baker, apparently I should have heard of her. This book is called Zoe Bakes Cookies, and it is by this woman here, Zoe Francois, I think her name is. And the cookies in this book, and bars, as they're known in America, look amazing. And I'm going to be spending the next few weeks trying out a lot of the recipes. And she also has a cakes book. She has, I think, 10 cookbooks. So I'm going to be working my way through them. I'll let you know what recipes I make and if there are any good ones. And yeah, I'm really excited about this book, so I want to share it with you. And also say that I made or maybe I'll insert some footage here. I made a cinnamon crumble blueberry cake. It's called a coffee cake, but it's not coffee. It's just what you would have with your coffee, by a baker called Audrey. And she has a online presence called Red Currant Bakery, and I'm absolutely obsessed with her and all of her recipes. They always come out so well, and I made that this week and it was amazing. So I'll leave a link in the description box down below to that. And yeah, if you bake anything, let me know. If you've got any recipes you think I should try, let me know. Obviously, I've started a baking channel because I'm obsessed, and I'll share that with you guys in the future, I promise. Other than that, I will see you guys in a couple of days for your next episode of Red Rum. Bye.